My guests today are two ladies with a very special relationship. They're mother and daughter, dancing partners, joint directors of the Darpan Academy, and more often than not the world thinks of them together in the same breath. But does that explain the magic in their relationship, or is there something more? Well, today is your chance to find out as I introduce you to Mrinalini and Mallika Sarabhai. A very warm welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
You know, there are so many bonds that tie you together. How would you describe your relationship with your daughter?
Well, to begin with, she's my daughter. So when I first took her in my arms, I started to love her, and that loving grew. And of course, it hasn't always been on the same wavelength, but we've enjoyed our relationship.
In her articles and essays, she says that she often quarrels with you, and she's the one that stands up and often shocks you.
Yes, she shocked me, but she's also educated me into the modern world, I must say, because my upbringing was rather classical, shall I say. And
Victorian.
I think, see what's happening.
So you're the rebel in the relationship, is that right?
No. I think I educated her. Her mother left a lot sort of not happening, and times changed.
You crossed the T's and dotted the I's.
Yes, and told her about what live-in relationships were and what experimental sex was about, and that love necessarily didn't mean marriage and things like that.
And did Mummy take it calmly, or was she absolutely appalled and horrified?
Well, I was brought up rather Victorian, rather British Victorian, I should say. And so my whole thing was very narrow. But I think Mallika slowly did educate me. Now I'm quite broad-minded.
So the motto is, my daughter's been my education.
Quite right, in a certain area only.
Let's go back to the very beginning of your stories. You grew up in a unique cosmopolitan Tamil family in the 1920s and 1930s.
Well,
what sort of childhood was it?
It wasn't Tamil because my father married a Malayali from Kerala when she was just 14 years old. And he educated her, and he believed in absolute freedom for women. And so she was educated in a very broad sense of the word, I think, by her husband, who was a lawyer. And we had an Irish governess. So altogether she had a very broad education. She used to ride. She was the first person, I think, who drove a motor car in Madras. She had a carriage all on her own, in which my father's juniors, as they were called then, very handsome juniors, used to drive her around town, and she used to drive the horse herself.
She sounds as if she was the belle of the city. In your biography, you talk a lot about your father. That was the real bond, wasn't it, in the family?
Yes, I think I adored my father, but then I think perhaps because he died when I was so young, that he has remained as a sort of very much of an ideal figure in my mind. And he was a wonderful person, and the amount of education he gave us in the short time we were with him. And he believed that girls and boys, all children, should be absolutely free to think for themselves, to act for themselves.
The interesting thing is, as a child, you were very shy of your father, weren't you, Mallika?
I was Amma's vachlu, as they used to call it, Amma's calf, and totally glued to her. And contrary to all Freudian psychology analysis, it wasn't that I was jealous when Amma spent time with Papa. I was jealous when Papa spent time with Amma, because it meant Amma going away from me.
In fact, there was even a point in time when you wondered whether you were going to end up being hostile to him, wasn't there?
Yes, that was an overheard conversation when I was supposed to be asleep in the back of the car. And that remained for many years, in spite of the fact that very often it was Papa who was looking after my brother Karthikeya and me, because Amma was on tour. And I think it only started changing when I came into my teens. And that's why in some senses I feel so cheated that I really only had like 4 years with Papa before he died.
The interesting thing is that, in fact, as a child, you were quite a rebel yourself, weren't you? I gather there's a lovely story that in the 1920s and 30s, you were often seen playing tennis in short shorts. Were people shocked?
Well, actually, even a little later, yes, when I was in my teens, I did play in very short shorts. And, well, they were shocked, but I think they accepted the Swaminathan's as we were, as a little different to the other people. As in later years, the Sarabhais were different from other people in the sense that they did things that others didn't do. So I think while they were shocked, I think they were also appreciative. At least the young people were very appreciative.
She had nice legs.
Did she?
She still does.
And do you have her nice legs? Have you
Well, I
inherited
don't know,
them?
but the funny thing is that so many years later, when I was in college in the early 70s, and I was representing Gujarat in the badminton teams, and I used to wear very, very short skirts, which horrified Gujarat as much, though it was so many years later. And the other parallel is that when Amma took to Bharatanatyam, everybody wrote to her mother saying, you know, you're sending your daughter into prostitution. 40 years later, I went into films when good girls didn't go into films. And Amma and Papa got exactly the same tone of letters.
It's amazing. You've almost led lives that have been in parallel to each other.
But what's astonishing is that conservatism and bigotry-mindedness in our society doesn't seem to change.
Absolutely, the problems have continued. But in fact, I'm told that when the Sarabhai clan first saw you, you weren't quite their daughter-in-law at that point in time, but you were dancing on stage in a rather daring Greek outfit.
Well, you see, I just come from school in Switzerland, and there I had done Greek dancing and ballet, and then suddenly there was a wonderful lady called Mrs. Cousins, Norman Cousins and his wife, and they did a lot for India, and she was a great friend of my mother's. She was one of the very, very famous social workers in India, and she played the piano, and all she knew was Chopin, so I had to dance to Chopin.
In a Greek toga.
So I was dancing Greek dancing. But when, at that time I had just met Vikram, and so all the Sarabhais were in the front row.
Were they scandalized?
I don't think so. I don't think they were really scandalized. I think I was feeling a little shy altogether.
Let's talk about your father, because he was very much a dominant figure in the family. Yet both your parents are very different, aren't they? Your mother is flamboyant, a dancer. He came across as serious, sober, scientist. Was it the fact that they were so different that actually made the attraction?
Yes and no, and I think, yes, from the obvious overt differences that you have mentioned, but I think they saw something very common underneath all of that, and that was a deep commitment to what they wanted to do, and a deep passion for what they wanted to do. And I think what really brought them together was that passion, seeing another individual who was not flippant, who was as committed and as impassioned by what he or she wanted to do. I think that more than anything else brought them together.
Except the other interesting thing is, although there was a deep bond between you which grew, but when he first proposed to you in Mahabalipuram, you didn't rush to say yes by any means, did you?
Well, I want to correct one thing that you said. I was never flamboyant. I was always a dancer. I've always felt alive on the stage, even today. But otherwise, I'm a very shy person, not at all flamboyant. And I think, no, I think the idea of moving from South India to what I call North India, Gujarat is not North, but to us in the South it was North India. I think that was what really stopped me from saying yes immediately.
And also the Sarabhais were a very different family. Yours was cosmopolitan and westernized, and theirs was committed to khadi. And I gather the biography says boiled vegetables.
No, well, actually, khadi was in my mother, because my mother was a great follower of Gandhiji. After her little period of riding and so on, she became a dedicated follower of Gandhiji. And so she wore khadi all the time. So it was not the khadi. I think it was, nor did I know the Sarabhais when I married. I only really knew Vikram, and I had just met his father and mother. But the families knew each other because both the mothers worked for women.
Your daughter, in one of her essays on her father, says that although he was a millionaire, he gave you a 4 and an engagement ring.
Well, Vikram was like that. Vikram, I think, was crazy sometimes about everything. He once sent me, when we were both in Bangalore, he sent me a stoat. Do you know what a stoat is? It's a horrible looking creature.
It's a bit like a toad, isn't it?
No, it's like a monkey with big eyes. And he had a little bantam car with a very faithful driver. He drove himself, but this man was his sort of Jeeves. And he sent me this stoat with a man, and I said, you take it right back.
And the Jeeves had to drive the stoat from Bangalore to Madras.
Poor chap. Now, as you said, your father, in a sense, was the one that did all the parenting, because your mother was away so often dancing.
Not always.
No, but I think no. No, that's not true. It's not that he did all the parenting, but they did it equally. And at least they had this understanding that till both my brother and I were 12, one of them would stay. Amma's commitments of traveling were much heavier in those days. So Papa often ended up babysitting.
That's what I was going to ask you. Who made a better mummy, mummy or Papa?
I was always there.
Amma made the better mother. Papa used to be terribly irritating because he would cuddle you but never coddle you. So if you, for instance, went with lousy homework because you couldn't figure it out, he'd sit you down and he'd say, breathe deeply. And you'd say, Papa, I've breathed. And he'd say, now try again. I said, Papa, I've been trying for 2 hours. He said, but darling, don't you think that your teacher wouldn't have given you the homework had you not been capable of doing it? So do it. And I would be screaming with irritation. Amma would have sat you down on her lap and done it.
Is he the one that's responsible for the fact that both you and your brother were brought up not just independent-mindedly, but with the confidence to be yourselves?
I think both of them. Both of them constantly encouraged us. And I remember discussions around the dinner table when I was 3 years old, where if it was a decision that affected all 4 of us, each one of us had an equal voice. And not only naam ke vaste, it was because you had an opinion. You were going to be involved in the process.
And he wanted to hear what his children thought.
And he wanted his children to think it through.
And he was the one, was he not, that actually thought and encouraged you to open up the Darpan Academy?
Yes, because he said that someday you will want Gujaratis to dance in your own group. I had all South Indians in my group, and he said someday you will need it, because I didn't like teaching at all. But I thought then that was a very sensible idea, because afterwards we do have a lot of Gujaratis, and now men and women both dance, and I think Gujarat has completely changed because of Darpana and because of that little seed he sowed. Because I really started the little school with just a one-room school because he said it, and it is true that someday I did have Gujarati dancers.
Sadly, you were only 17 when he died on New Year's Eve in '71. You suddenly got the news one morning that he died.
I was shooting my first film. I had, the previous morning, he was leaving for the airport, I was leaving for my shooting. It was 5 o'clock in the morning. He had promised to come back and take Amma and me back to Ahmedabad for New Year's Eve, and I said, don't let me down again. And he said, no, and I said, have you had your blood pressure checked? And he said, stop harassing me, both of you, because I've just had it, I've got a completely clean sheet. I went to the shooting, came back, went the next morning. As soon as I got to the shooting, my director, Prabhat Mukherjee, who brought me into films, came to me and said, we have to go home, your mother isn't feeling well. And as soon as Amma heard, she had called Prabhat and said, don't tell her it's Vikram, but bring her home. And I remember the horror of that taxi journey back and getting to the Little Gibbs Road Atomic Energy apartment and seeing these hundreds of cars. And not even for an instant thinking it was Papa.
It must have been a horrible, horrible shock.
It was.
Actually, I was in Bombay with him. We were spending time together, and I was reading the paper of his speech. And I was sitting in my dressing gown early morning and reading the paper and reading Vikram's speech when the call came from Kerala.
You were 53 at the time, far too young to be a widow. But they say in your biography that you got back your confidence and your inspiration when 4 or 5 years later Mallika started to dance. Is that true?
Yes, I think Mallika helped me a great deal through that time. My son was away in college in America, and Mallika and I were alone together. And I think she gave me a lot of strength, and not only in dancing, but altogether by being with me and propping me up and saying, you have to do this, now come on, let's do something new in the dance, and make me, I didn't even want to dance again.
Is that when the bond between you went beyond just being mother and daughter to something closer and more special?
I think we've always had a very close band. As she said, she was my vachudu, my little calf. She would hold my sari everywhere we went and, you know, really be with me. And I think she's always been with me, very close.
Let's take a break. I want to come back in part 2 and talk to you about dance and what it means to the two of you. We'll be back in a moment's time. See you then. Welcome back. My guests are Mrinalini and Mallika Sarabhai. Both of you have devoted your life to dance and to dancing. What does dance mean to you?
Well, to me, it meant my breath. I can't say it any more than that, because I think when I was a child, I knew I had to dance. There was no dancing anywhere around. People did hardly know the word dance in my family. But I just knew that I was a dancer, and I really believe that it's from another life.
It was an instinctive feeling in a sense
Yes.
that you were almost born with.
I think so. I think it's from somewhere else.
You came to dance much later, and in fact to begin with you weren't even drawn to it at all. Today, what does it mean to you?
It's my battery charger for everything that I do. For me, dance is one of the languages I speak as a communicator. And when I need literally to recharge, I dance.
But are you surprised then that you took to it so late?
No, I think that was part of the me becoming me. That meandering, that finding, that
Experimenting.
losing again, that refinding. And I think that continued, it continues today, but that continued not only through my coming to dance, but perhaps even more in the 5 years that I went away from every mooring of mine when I was doing Draupadi in Peter Brook's Mahabharata, and the absolutely forced solitude and the process of discovering what my performance meant to women across the world, that has made me who I am today.
Your dances, unlike your mother's, are much more experimental, much more innovative. Are you like that as a personality as well?
I think in many ways I have become much more a synthesis of my father and my mother. In that, for instance...
Consciously?
No, not consciously at all.
It's just happened.
It just happened. In that there is this great need to constantly search different media, search different techniques, search just to make new molds. There is an excitement in that. That comes very much, I think, from my father. And the sort of commitment to technique and then throwing it away, that comes from Mama.
Many of your own compositions have been inspired by the classical authors, Kalidas, Tagore. Is that, in a sense, a reflection of your upbringing?
Well, I was very always delving into the past for new ideas and so on, and then when I went to Shantiniketan, of course Tagore was the last 3 years of his life, but he sort of welcomed me and thought, you know, I was a good dancer, and he would make me create my own work, and I did a lot of his work, so I was inspired by him. But I'm always inspired by things that happen around me, like I think perhaps I was one of the first to do dowry deaths and environmental subjects through dance, but through classical dance. So I wanted to show how classical dance could depict the modern life and modern age and the destruction that is happening. But I stuck to a certain classical background.
That was, in a sense, the spine around which your dancing happened.
Exactly.
But I think that is true for me as well. Where my difference lies is that I think Amma stayed with dance. My new work uses dance, theatre, music, movement, storytelling, puppetry, mask work, not as separate things, but as a seamless performance.
Now, how do you react to that?
I think it's very good, because often Mallika will, you see, I use writing a lot also. I write poems which we dance, and sometimes Mallika will come to my room and say, Amma, I want a poem in 10 minutes on the girl child and the cruelty. I mean, it happens, ask her, and it happens. I write a poem for her immediately, and then she puts it into some wonderful form, either mask or, as she said, puppetry, or herself. And as she said, the only difference is that for me everything was dance, and for her it's communication. And I think also, she may not agree, but I think that a little of her not wanting to dance was also because I left her so often when she was small. And I think dance also, to a little extent, she resented when she was very small, because it took me away. Because it took me away.
Is that true? Not at all. But you won't say it verbally.
Well, she wouldn't.
No. I mean, it might be if I regressed during a hypnotic session, I might say that, but certainly never consciously, because...
Now, you're famous for a Ganesh costume where with your feet you sketch out the design of the Lord Ganesh. You did it for President Clinton when he came 2 years ago.
Right.
And he asked you for a picture. You gave
Which
it
he
to him.
has.
Were you impressed with him?
He's very sweet.
That's all?
And he comes across as very engaging. I mean, he engages totally.
But I've noticed
Well-
that you circumvented the word impressed almost completely. Sweet and engaging, but not impressive?
Well, I mean, I'm not usually impressed with people unless I sit down and have at least an hour's conversation with them.
You're not the sort who's swept off her feet by grand presidents. Someone that you danced for very often, and in fact he was a close friend of the family, was Jawaharlal Nehru.
Yes.
You once sent him a white rose in Cairo when you couldn't attend his performance. Do you remember
No,
that?
not he. Yes, but
He
he couldn't
sent
attend
you.
my performance. I sent him a white rose because he loved roses, and I knew he was coming for a very difficult situation of war and of quarreling and all that. So I thought, what should I send him? So through one of my very dear friends, I sent him the nicest rose in Cairo that I could find, and he entered it with the rose. So it immediately became, I heard later, a topic of conversation and broke the ice.
Now today your daughter Anahita, who I believe is in her early teens, is training to dance. She'd be the third generation of the family.
The third generation is already in place. My son, who is 18, has been dancing professionally for 2 years already. And he has broken tradition in that he's the first male Sarabhai to dance. But yes, Anahita will follow the female line. I'm not sure she'll ever become a dancer. I think Revanta will. Revanta is and wants to be.
He is a dancer and a very good dancer.
But Anahita is very much as I used to be at that age, which is physically lazy, loves being on stage but doesn't want to put the work in. It'll change perhaps, because today, I mean, I love my rehearsals much more than I love performances. So,
You know, 50 years ago the word Sarabhai used to be associated with textiles and chemicals. Today it's synonymous with dance. Do you take that as a compliment to yourself?
Well, I'm very sorry that it isn't still associated, because we were very proud, especially of calico and the beautiful designs that used to come out of calico mills. But I think my father-in-law will be very proud of me, because he encouraged me so much. And when there was a lot of criticism about Vikram bringing a Devadasi from the south,
Nachwali.
Nachwali from the south, Papa, as we called him, used to come to all my performances, and I danced everywhere. And at first people came out of curiosity, and slowly, slowly they began to see that this is something sacred to me and something beautiful. And that is how it started, but he would never miss a performance.
A pleasure getting to know both of you. Thank you very much for this wonderful interview.
Thank you.